It is. It's Bret the Hitman Hart. Bret, I'm so excited, and I want to thank you so much for calling in and being on the show. And I know, I've asked and agreed to come on here today and just kind of shoot the breeze about old times for a minute. And first of all, how you doing, Bret?
I'm doing excellent. I've had a great summer up here in Calgary, Canada. I mean, we just had the nicest summer up here I think we've had in about 10, 15 years. It was just about 75 every day and just sunny and beautiful. I've had a great summer, and everything's good.
Well, that is awesome. Down here in Memphis, Tennessee, we've had our typical summers, which would be about 95 to 100 degrees every day and the highest humidity imaginable. So we take some time and come in here to the restaurant where our air conditioner is always pumping great and it's always nice and cool in here. And Glenn orders some barbecue and chows down and that's the best part of our summer down here. But listen, enough about the weather. I know that you had a podcast for a while, and I don't. When I agreed to do this, and Glenn and our friend Chris Perez, who played for the Cleveland Indians, asked me to do this podcast, at first I said no because, I didn't want to pressure people like you. I didn't want to pressure my friends into coming on and being on podcasts because it's not always the most pleasant experience, is it, Bret?
Well, sometimes, in my case, I've had some, I've had a thing where you feel, you try to be really honest, and in the end, you end up sort of hurting a lot of people's feelings and stuff like that. And, sometimes it's not worth it, to drag somebody through the mud when you realize later, like, oh, I was just trying to make a point, But, in the case with you, we've had such a good history. I have no problem sort of coming back on and trying to restore some of those memories to the fans.
Yeah, that is awesome. So you don't have this podcast is just about me and you. So you don't have to. You can be totally honest, and you don't have to worry about hurting anybody's feelings except mine, and you don't have to worry about that either. So just say whatever you want to on here today. I mean, the first thing that I can remember, of course, when I started in the WWE in 1993, they immediately put you and I in this little program or feud or rivalry against each other. And the one thing that I guess it made such an impact, because still to this day, I just did an appearance this past weekend, and fans come up all the time, and the first thing they say is, man, when you first came to the WWE, I hated you so bad. And I'll immediately say, then you must have been a Bret Hart fan. And they say, yes. I mean, at that time, I mean, you were the top guy in '93, right?
Yeah, I think, to credit to you, you were one of the best villain heel wrestlers I ever worked with. You were a guy that understood how to get heat, how to keep heat, and how not. You were like, I can remember after we'd worked a few times that I think it was the Kiss the Foot match.
Oh, yeah.
Later on in Philadelphia. I remember when we worked that match, I mean, the fans were starting to turn already. That's when they started kind of going with starting to go with the heels and go against the baby faces for just for the fun of it. And I can remember when I worked with you in Philadelphia, I was going, it's not going to have Philadelphia. It's Jerry Lawler's the guy that's got his heat. I will be the baby face no matter what. And, that's how it was with you. You were such a great villain. Like you know how to get heat all the time, and you were impossible to like as a heel. I mean, you were a great heel.
Well, and of course, I mean, like I said, you were over so well at the time that it did make it easy for me. And the one thing that I was a little bit concerned about, but I mean, it like you said, I mean, being the heel that I was trying to be. And it was just such a natural target, was the fact that, because you had such a history with your parents being involved, Stu and Helen, and then they were at some of the shows, and then of course I said some I said some pretty derogatory things about your parents, talking about their age and all that sort of, talking about the kids and all that sort of thing. And I did worry at the time, because if you remember, I mean, you and I, we worked against each other in the ring, but we didn't hang out together or anything like that, and I wouldn't even say that we were like fast friends or anything back then. It was a situation then where you traveled on the road all the time, and you didn't, you weren't really around. At least you and I weren't around each other at all. So I worried at the time about some of the things I said about your parents, if it offended you or if it offended your parents. And what you told me one time later about what your mom said about that.
Yeah, it was Owen. It was really funny because I remember Owen coming up to me and he said something about my dad being older than the Dead Sea or something.
I'll bet when you two were young, the Dead Sea was only sick. Is that true? Oh. How old are you anyway?
I can't remember what it was. Something. He might have put his false teeth in and eat himself backwards.
Why don't you put your false teeth in backward and eat yourself to death?
There were so many of them, and I was okay with them. But I remember Owen came around, and I know something about that when you said. And I remember Owen said, "That's too strong. That's too much."
Yeah.
And I was like, and I kind of remember Owen kind of got me wound up a little bit about it. And I remember I was coming home, and we both were kind of meeting up at the house. And I'm not sure if that was before Owen turned heel or not. I think it was. But I do remember coming home into the kitchen at my dad's house, and they had the wrestling on, and the TV show was on in the afternoon. Now today they have WWE Raw in the afternoon, and my mom and dad were in the kitchen. They were watching the show, and I remember my mom just laughing her head off. She loved it. She had so much fun, and she was at Jerry Lawler and all that. She was, and my dad was laughing because he was so happy because my mom was happy. And I remember Owen and I come in, and we were just getting ready. The next time I saw you, I was going to tell you to kind of lighten it up a little bit, and not say many things because it might be actually making them mad. And I realized how they had so much fun with your jabs and all that stuff, and that they were as much. My mom loved all that stuff. She loved being part of it, and she would never admit that. And my dad was happy that she was happy. And I never did mention it to you. I think I mentioned to you that I almost did, but like come to you about it. But in the end, I remember telling Owen, I said, "Look how happy they are. They actually love it." And so we both dropped it and never mentioned it again. And it was just, again, a credit to you. You had a good way of, you were entertaining.
Hey, look at Stu over here. He's got those baseball eyes. 2 baggers. What's the matter? Up a little late last night, Stu? Huh? Still a little frisky? Look at your kid down there. Hey, Brett.
This is so distracting.
Hey, Brett.
And, we were a little too sensitive to the fact that what you were doing was really good.
I remember you finally telling that to me years later, and matter of fact, not all that long ago. I think we had some kind of special tribute night, and you told me that story about how your mom, it felt like they were flattered almost to be included, and it got attention on them and that sort of thing, and that they were pleased with it. And that really made me feel good because I worried about that for a long time. But yeah. I remember one night in particular, you were wrestling Bam Bam Bigelow. I think this was when Raw was in its very early stages, and your parents were sitting, Stu and Helen were sitting up in the balcony, and they had me go out and just approach Stu and Helen, and I started cutting a promo. I think that's when I said something about, why don't you put your false teeth in backwards and eat yourself to death or something. I don't know. But anyway, some things. Do you remember that night you were wrestling Bam Bam? Then you actually left the ring and came up there after me.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, Jerry, that might have been the very, very first Raw that we did in Manhattan.
Yes, that old Manhattan Center, right?
It might have been the very first Raw. I mean, it was one of the first ones, and I remember I had to run all the way through the foyer and go all the way up a bunch of stairs to get to you. It was like not so easy to come up and find you. I hadn't gone up to look to actually run up the stairs. I can remember when I ran up there, I wasn't sure where I was going to go. I thought I'd run up more stairs. But I remember my mom pretended to bawl her eyes out, and I remember going like she should have got a bad acting award, But
Oh,
was
I thought they were great at it, especially Stu. They were awesome. Just I mean, he was great because he would just so incredulous. I mean, he was so mad. I would make these remarks and these insults and everything, and then but that I mean that really got the ball rolling, and then of course I don't know about you, but I really had a lot of fun leading up to that Kiss My Foot match. I mean, some of the things they let us do. Like, do you remember that I went to? They took me out to this horse stable. These horse stables, and I'm like, they said, we want you to put your feet in this horse manure, and I said, no, I'm not putting my feet in horse manure. And they said, no, you don't really have to, but I mean, we're just going to make it appear that you did. I mean, we had some fun with building up to that match.
You know what? Yeah, I remember it was kind of almost. I don't want to take too much credit, but I thought it kind of saved that pay-per-view. I thought it was. I never thought much about. I might have been doing Lonesome Dove, the TV show, in those days. I can't remember exactly, but I thought maybe I wasn't around as I was available for the pay-per-views. I think was the only thing. So I was kind of out of the loop a little bit, and I'd been off TV maybe for a few months or a month or so, and I had come back just for that pay-per-view. And I remember not being sure what kind of impact I would have, and I do remember. That Philadelphia almost was like the perfect place for that Kiss the Foot match. I mean, they loved it. I thought it, as I remember it now today, I remember it kind of saved the pay-per-view, and they were like, it was the best match on the whole thing. The fans really reacted to everything, and like I said, I think that was the start of the days where they were starting to kind of go against the baby face a little bit and trying to go with the heels, which kind of does throw a monkey wrench into the psychology of the rest of the match.
Yeah, the fans were trying to go. They were trying to be anti-establishment, is what the whole deal was. That was the start of that stuff.
Yeah, that was the start of it, and I noticed when you came out, none of that happened. It was like back to the old formula again, and it was good. We had some really good matches. I really loved the matches that we had. You know, your heel psychology and just how you got heat. Like sometimes if you had to, like when you broke the crutch over my head. You had that crutch where you sort of hold it down by your side, like your hip, and hide it from the referee, and the referee would never see it. All those kind of things are things that a lot of the heels today don't know how to do, how to be sneaky and dangerous. And I always thought you were such a great sort of nemesis for the Hitman character. I think that's why we had such great chemistry, was that I was clearly the baby face and the underdog sort of against a guy that would do anything to win. And it was, your tactics and, the stuff that you did was great as a villain.
Well, that's the way I was taught down in Memphis. I mean, it was just the philosophy was there should never be any question in the fan's mind that the good guy would beat the bad guy if the bad guy didn't cheat. I mean, you had to cheat to win. That was the philosophy that I was brought up with, and so that just and you're right. That's something that's totally gone today out of today's business. I mean, they just want to be bigger and stronger, and to me, that doesn't make the people mad when the bad guy wins today. I mean, it should just make them respect him and say, well, he was just bigger and badder than his opponent.
Who would you say, Jerry, were the influences on you to learning that sort of style? There was a lot of guys out of Memphis that had great sort of heel styles and stuff, and I don't know if it's from. I'm not sure the wrestlers that you got to watch as a kid growing up that influenced your style.
Yeah, and they were basically all guys from Memphis. Little guy. I mean, like there was one little guy, Tojo Yamamoto, a little Japanese wrestler. He was small and he was, but this was back too in the days that kind of if you were a foreigner, you were automatically a bad guy, and Tojo being from Japan, he was actually a Hawaiian guy. But he adopted the name Tojo, which was back during World War II or whatever. That was the Japanese emperor, and then he would always bring up references of Pearl Harbor. So just the sneakiness and the cheating and all of that sort of stuff was just it just taught to me by like Tojo but all of the bad guys that we had back then. That was just the way it was. I just remember this one tag team called the Blue Infernos that we had down there, and I just used to love to watch those guys. And man, they were just, they would do the double switch because they were dressed alike, had outfits alike, masks. They would switch out and they were just the best at cheating. Everything they did was just against the rules, and that has just had. I watched the fan reaction to those guys, and that was just the way that I knew it had to be done.
Well, Jackie Fargo, was he a great heel?
Well, Jackie Fargo was never a heel. Jackie Fargo was the quintessential babyface, the good guy that the heels always took advantage of. And I mean, he was, and that was something that he drilled into our head. And he would, certain things, like when I started working against Jackie, if he would always tell me, on your interviews or your promos, he said, you put your opponent over. And he said that way, when when you beat somebody, if you win, then you've really beaten somebody. It's not that you go out there and just totally disregard your opponent's abilities or anything like that. And he would get so mad if I would ever say anything about him being older than me or about his weight or anything like that. He said, you never bring negatives to the attention of the fans. Put your opponent over. But I think that was more personal. I think he was just talking about himself on that, But that's just the kind of little lessons I was taught here and there. I mean, especially when I talked about Jackie Fargo being old or older than me or whatever. He would come out and say, "Yeah, I may be old, but how you going to be bragging when this old man kicks your butt down there this week?" So I got the lesson. He's right.
Well, I know for me in Calgary, we were lucky enough to have a lot of wrestlers from Memphis pass through sooner or later in Calgary, and like Honky Tonk Man and Dr. D, Dave Schultz. So were two guys that came from Memphis, and a lot of other guys that came from Memphis. But they always had a good psychology on how to be heels. They knew how to. They always knew how to talk, get heat. And they always I can remember wrestling Dr. D, Dave Schultz, and his psychology was always to, because if I'll win, but when I win, I want to slither out of the ring and crawl back to the dressing with the belt. And you stand in the ring, you look like you should have won, kind of thing, every night. And that psychology was something I learned, and it was like that's how you get heat. And there was a lot of guys that from Memphis that must have had it instilled in them from watching wrestling down there and then being part of it too. It was a part of the nature down there. The heels knew how to get heat.
Right. Well, David Schultz is one of the few guys that I actually helped train, and he learned the same way that I was taught. And then of course Honky Tonk Man, my cousin, he started right down there with us as one of the Blonde Bombers, and then went on once he got to the WWE with the gimmick of the Honky Tonk Man. But yeah, he learned every bit of his stuff down in Memphis. Now, speaking of Memphis and being the bad guy or the heel or whatever, how was it when we finally convinced you to come to Memphis? This was crazy back then, because I was playing the dual role, and then you got the opportunity to see what that was like. When I was home in Memphis and still wrestling the rest of the week, I was the big babyface. I was the fan favorite and had been for a long time. But then when I'd go on Monday nights up to New York, they hated me. And then I finally convinced you and Owen and some of you guys to come down to Memphis. And it was the opposite reaction for you down there. The fans didn't like you in Memphis because they were so behind me down there.
I remember having a funny interview with Owen where we went out in the ring and we cut a promo on the Memphis fans. And
right.
Made some parallel to Deliverance or something like that. But I remember this, like you said, it was very interesting because you had so much heat in all these other towns. Like in New York, we had probably just done maybe one of those things like the Manhattan Center where we did Raw and all that. You were badgering Bowie and my mom and dad and stuff like that. And then I went to Memphis, and I remember kind of being a little confused as to how it worked the way it did. Because every once in a while WWE would work in Memphis, and I was sort of, never noticed any real significance. I was still sort of a baby face, and
right.
But when I went to wrestle you for your own show, I was really surprised that they absolutely cheered you 100%, and I was 100% the heel, whether I liked it, whether I understood it or not. And I remember we just kind of went with it. I remember Owen went, and we cut a promo in the ring, and I remember talking about a bunch of things about the Southern fans and Memphis, and it was a little. You had to kind of roll with the punches a little bit and go with it, and but it was always worked, always. That was a fun experience too.
Yeah, and if you remember, that was how the heel Vince McMahon was created, because he came down to Memphis and thinking that probably that the fans would like him, but then when he got involved in a little situation against me down there, they just despised him, and I think Vince fell in love with being that character. I mean, then he went back then he went back to New York, and that was a heel Vince.
Yeah, I believe it. You had kind of had that magic hold on the fans, and I imagine that must have come from a lot of babyface matches where you were the underdog, because they were loyal to the end to you down there. I don't know how they are now, but
fortunately it's that way right now. As a matter of fact, we're going to be starting a TV show next month called Jerry Lawler's Classic Memphis Wrestling, and we're going to be going back and showing some of those great matches from the 80s and early 90s and stuff like that. When Memphis was considered one of the wrestling meccas of the whole country. It was one of the last territories that hung on for so long, and we did have some. I mean, when you look around at all the big stars of the WWE that have come down the line, like Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Undertaker, Kane. I mean, there's so many of those guys either got their start or at least came through Memphis at one time or other.
Yeah, or even Jimmy Hart, and you can go on and on with the guys that came out of there. I mean, and like I said, they always came out of there pretty schooled. I mean, you could go from Memphis and go anywhere, and you usually end up in a territory like Calgary where you were the best talker and the number one heel, because people hated you because you knew how to work that style. And, I always thought different regions of the country had different styles, and Memphis had a unique sort of psychology and style that was, it fit to the Calgary style. Calgary style was a lot more wrestling and a lot more serious style, but the guys from Memphis and the South that came up to work for my dad always stood out against the sort of the baby faces and the wrestling style wrestlers, and they always went right to the top because they were the ones that had the heat. And it's a credit to the Memphis wrestlers and the style of wrestling that they created in those days. I don't know if there was any other place that had that kind of heat. Maybe Florida, maybe Georgia. I'm not sure, but I know Memphis. If you started out there, you almost guaranteed that you could talk and that you could carry the heat and be the top heel.
Yeah, well, I appreciate those compliments. Brett, you can't see this, but Glenn Moore over here across the table from me he's waving his hands and saying, I want to ask him something. So go, Brett, if you're okay with Glenn, go ahead. What do you want to ask Brett?
Yeah, we talked about it in our pre-show meeting, so to speak, when we do our prep for the show, and we put out a poll on our official Twitter page asking what the topic of this week should, and the Bret Hart Jerry Lawler feud was the winner, which is why we're talking about the feud this week. And a lot of questions came in from Twitter people and listeners and whatnot. And you talked about it, Brett, really quickly, but the crutch shot to the head at SummerSlam 93, and then you had the impromptu match with Jerry, which led to the sharpshooter being applied, maybe a little bit sinking in, a little bit deep on Jerry's back, and holding it for almost 5 minutes. A lot of people want to know, was the hold being applied for about almost 5 minutes part of what was going to happen, or was that a receipt, so to speak, to Jerry's crutch shot that you had earlier in the evening.
And here's where you can be. Here's where you can be honest.
It was definitely a receipt.
Yes.
Positively. Yeah, I was going to say, I think Jerry tried to kill me with the crutch. I thought he was trying to kill me with the crutch. He broke that crutch right over my face. Like it whipped around so hard. I remember, like, if you ever watched it, I go down to the mat. I remember feeling like, I thought my whole face, especially my cheek, I thought he split my whole cheek open, that it was just, I couldn't believe that it wasn't bleeding. It was a pretty good shot. And I remember lying on the mat going, that was stiff. And
stiff.
I thought for sure, Jerry, I wonder, I said, maybe Jerry's trying to kill me. And I realized after that match, when Jerry, I think it was maybe I'm thinking of the King of the Ring, when he picked that big throne up. And I think he had done that to me a few months before to start our program. But he had picked up a big throne it was a big wooden throne, like chair, that must have weighed 100 pounds.
Or more. No, I think it couldn't have weighed too much more. I wouldn't have been able to pick it up. But yeah, at least 100 pounds.
And I sort of knew then Jerry was trying to kill me with that for sure. He brought that across my back. I remember I could hardly take a deep breath for about 3 months.
Oh, no.
And then I was waiting for the SummerSlam, and when Jerry tried to take my head off with the crutch, I was like, okay, he is trying to kill me. And so when I had him in the sharpshooter, I remember, and I'm not sure what it was. I remember guys like Jack Lanza and Rene Goulet and even Pat Patterson. They kept coming up to me and pushing me back, like trying to pull me off, but at the same time they're pushing me back, so there's even more pressure on Jerry.
Yes, exactly. Those jerks.
So I remember
that was part of a rib to those guys. They were really getting their jollies watching Bret just almost try to break my back there.
I mean, I was pretty tired. I remember I'm not sure if that was when I'd worked twice. I mean, where I worked with Doink before that. But I remember I was feeling it in my legs. But I remember thinking, no, I better hold this on for another 30 seconds or so. I remember counting 30 seconds and then going, I'll try another 30 seconds. And he's earned it. And I put him in there pretty long. I do remember when Jerry came back, I had Aaron Neville had been there that night, the singer. He had been there to sing the anthem, as I remember. And I remember he came backstage, and he was standing backstage watching the matches. And I remember Jerry had crawled back. He couldn't actually stand. He actually crawled back like an alligator and went straight into the dressing room and was in, I think, a lot of agony. And I can remember Aaron Neville, I came back and he looked at me and goes, you did a number on that guy. And I always remembered that. And I thought, well, I hope I did anyway. And I hope Jerry's okay from it today.
Yeah, finally, I can walk upright again. They might have had to stretcher me out that night.
Yeah, that was the stretcher because after your match, you had, I think Owen came into the ring and some of your family, Bret, came into the ring to try to get you they were either helping you apply the hold or they were trying to get you off of Jerry. But a stretcher came out and Jerry was being stretchered out. I remember Owen jumping from the top rope onto the outside, onto Jerry while he's on the stretcher. And then someone just wheeling Jerry to the back as quick as he can to get Jerry to the back. But that was very, very entertaining. As a 10-year-old, that was very entertaining to watch as a young wrestling fan. But it was great.
Well, I was just going to say,
on the Cheerios box or something, or the Lucky Charms box, and Bruce was there that night too. And I remember Bruce throwing a couple of stiff boots with cowboy boots on, trying to kick Jerry while he was on the stretcher. So he had a handful of hearts working on him that night, and.
Yeah, the whole family got a few shots in on me that night. I'm telling you, it was like in my defense though. I swear I was not trying to kill you, certainly, or even hurt you. All I was thinking was, it was a metal crutch, and all I was thinking was, I've got to make this crutch bend. And what I didn't realize was that metal crutch was more I guess, more flexible or more flimsy, so to speak, than a wooden crutch would have been. I mean, and like you said, when I watched that thing back, when I whacked you with the crutch, it just bent right around and hit you in the face. I mean, it was like the whip of the crutch. It wasn't where I hit you on the back that was so bad. It was that the crutch broke and whipped around and then, like you said, hit you in the face, which I promise was totally unintentional. I would
Jerry.
Never.
Sure,
well,
Jerry.
really, I'm serious now. But it did. I mean, it made a believable thing.
I remember if you watch that where he throws that throne on me and breaks it over. No, the scepter. That was another one. That was what hurt my back. The scepter. He had that scepter was about as thick as a street light. I know it was really thick. It wasn't. And I remember Jerry must have thought it was just going to snap over my back, but I remember it just crushed me. And then he picked the throne up and dropped that down on me. I remember that landed the leg of the throne, which was about 100-something pounds, landed right on one of my fingers, right on the fingernail.
Oh no!
I remember it's like, oh my God, like he's trying to kill me. And then when the crutch came, it's like, all right, he is definitely trying to kill me, and I'll have to put him in the sharpshooter for at least a half hour.
Well, I did. It felt like a half hour in the sharpshooter, and then not only, and he was always pretty forcible in bending me around. I mean, that like he just about bent me in half like a pretzel there. But then the other time in the Kiss My Foot match, somehow this wasn't planned either. Somehow he grabbed my foot and bent my leg up and put my own foot in my mouth. How did you do that?
I think it's one of those things where Vince had told me if I could do it, to go ahead and do it. And I was like, all right. So it was just like, there was a lot of determination. I was like determined to see if I could fit it in there. And I got about half of it in there. And,
yeah. Well, it wasn't the fitting the foot in. It was the bending of the leg to get my foot up to my mouth. I mean, I think as a little kid, I might remember trying to bite my toenails or something at one time, but I never could get my foot up there. But somehow, even as an adult, you were able to bend my leg and get my foot all the way to my mouth, which did not feel good at all.
Well, remembering all those matches, I will say this much, is that I really did enjoy all of them. There was always a lot of, a lot of heat. And I loved what I always liked about my era or my style or my reign when I was champion different times, and when I was sort of, like Jerry said, the top guy down there, is I liked the versatility of working with just about anybody. And, if you go back to those days and the guys I worked with, I didn't wrestle anybody else like Jerry. Jerry was the only one like that had that kind of style and had that kind of heat. But I liked wrestling, like when I worked with Jerry and we had the matches that we had. They're always different than, like if I was wrestling Bob Backlund. I loved working with Bob Backlund. I loved the match I had with him at Survivor Series when he won the title and Owen threw the towel in the ring. And I was like, I don't know how many guys in the business in those days that could have given Bob Backlund that kind of match. But I was really proud of that, and I was proud of that with Jerry. And then I was other guys like, Hakushi or of course Owen or different guys. They're always different styles, and that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be able to wrestle anybody. I always thought as champion that was my job, was to go in there and wrestle any wrestler on the card and give him his best match and give him all the credibility that he deserved. And again, working with Jerry was always a pleasure. I mean, there was some soreness that followed, but I always enjoyed the chemistry and the psychology of our work together.
Well, Bret, I really appreciate that, and I'll be perfectly honest with you. I felt at the time that you didn't like working with me. That I always, and it was something about coming from Memphis that a lot of times, and I think up in the WWE at that time, because Memphis had been such a long holdout. And, of not kind of coming around or succumbing to the WWE, that we were kind of looked down on. And I felt at the time that you really looked at working with me as like a come down from working against guys like Bob Backlund or Shawn Michaels or those different guys, you know. And I really genuinely felt I don't know. I was intimidated, you know, because I thought, man, this guy, you know, he's the WWE champion, and he's really feels like it's beneath him to work with me.
Well, you know, it's not true. I always, I think maybe there might have been some curiosity in the sense that maybe when I first worked with you, I didn't know how it would go. But once I worked with you, I think once I understood. I'm guessing that SummerSlam was probably our first match. But you always had, like I said, it was always really easy, and the crowd would come unglued, and I was always had the fans behind me, and it was always worked through. I think one of what was the problem, or could have been the problem, or might have been perceived as the problem, was that I remember my dad wanted me to work for him for some show he had. And it was a big show for him, and he was kind of like Memphis, where he was trying to keep the ball rolling, and every time he ran a show, WWF would run one of their big shows like right before it and kind of kill his momentum all the time. And he asked me if I could work a show for him, and I went to Vince and said, "Can I work a show for him?" And he goes, "No, you can't. You can only work for WWE in case you got hurt." And they had all these reasons or excuses why I couldn't work for my dad to help him out. So I told my dad, I said, "I can't work for you, Jay. Vince won't allow me to work for any other wrestling company." And then when he came to me and said, "We want you to go and you can work for Jerry Lawler in Memphis," I was like, "Well, how come I can work for Jerry Lawler, but I couldn't work for my dad?" And so that might have been a little bit. I remember kind of not being I wasn't interested in going to Memphis and working, not because of you, but because of the circumstances. And Vince basically, you know, asked me to do it as a favor, and I never kind of made a big issue of it because, you know, you never can. And you know, that was probably might have seemed like I wasn't too interested in going down there or working with you and being part of it or anything, but it wasn't really. It had nothing to do with you.
Wow. See, I had no idea that kind of stuff was going on behind the scenes. So I appreciate you, you know, letting me know about that. Yeah, and that was a tough time then when you know they felt like everybody was in competition with the WWE, and then and I think finally Vince realized, and I don't know if he ever eased up on you guys and your dad up there or not, but you know, he finally realized, hey, I better let some of these places survive, because that's going to be the only place I'm going to be able to find new talent from. And that's why he started working with us down there in Memphis, was to use Memphis as like a developmental territory for him. Did he ever do that with you guys up in Calgary?
No, he didn't, but he should have. I agree with you. It should, you know, that's where guys were learning. You know, if you look at Calgary back in those days, that's where Pillman came from. That's where Owen came from. That's where a lot of guys came from that were his stars 5 years down the road. It's like, you know, you can't, you know, those were breeding grounds for talent. And, you know, he had a funny mentality about almost like, and maybe still does today, about crushing every guy that's any kind of competition, you know, and, you know, that's not always the healthiest thing to do. Cause, you know, a lot of places like Calgary now, like they run 1 or 2 shows a year up here, and the wrestling fans are so starved for wrestling, and sometimes there's WWE, there's not enough to go around. Whereas you know, these young wrestlers that are learning today, if they could just get their start from a territory like Memphis or a place like Calgary, or you know, different territories that are what you wouldn't even call them territories, but little companies that are struggling to sort of survive. And it seems to me that WWE goes out of their way to crush them every chance they get. And I always thought that that's counterproductive to their own benefit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, it certainly was that way, I guess, with your dad in Calgary and everything like that. I think it's honestly, I think because I know you do some shows as well, but I go around and do a lot of independent shows now, and they don't seem as determined now. I think that the mentality has changed in the fact that they realize there needs to be places where guys can get their start. I mean, even though WWE has the NXT as their developmental point, I mean, that all of those shows are on TV. So you if you're a young wrestler, you got to start somewhere even before you can get into NXT. So that's I think they've realized that now.
Yeah, I know that a lot of these independent promotions today, they don't have TV, and it's hard for a young wrestler. I remember when I first started wrestling, until I remember wrestling for 3 or 4 months. I was actually started in Puerto Rico, and then I came home and I worked in Amarillo, Texas for a little bit. And then I came home and started for my dad, and it's about 4 or 5 months after I'd been in the business. But I'd had a little bit of an experience, but I'd never seen myself on TV ever. And I remember the very first time I watched myself wrestle on TV, where I could actually visually see myself, and I could see all the things that I was doing wrong. I was sort of always trying to wrestle like an amateur wrestler. I always had my body sort of crouched down low, like I was going to shoot a takedown. And I learned, but I didn't realize, you got to stand upright and look as big as you can and keep your chest up and look as strong and solid as you can, rather than crouching down like an amateur wrestler. It's not that there's anything wrong with it, but it's just you look better, And there's a lot of little things that, as soon as you see yourself one time on TV, you can correct all these little things that you do with your own style. You can be your own best critic and fix things. I fixed things in a couple of weeks that improved I remember the very first sort of what they call lifters or elbow smashes, like those Dory Funk lifters. I remember I used to do those. I thought I had them down pretty good, and then I realized first time I saw them on TV, it's like, oh God, they look terrible. So I'm not throwing them hard enough.
Yeah, those forearm uppercuts.
They got better and better, and it became a big part of one of my moves in the ring. And I just, all I can say is, as a young wrestler, you can learn so much being on TV. And if you're never on TV, you really hard to fix your style and learn how to be the pro that you can be.
Yeah, you're exactly right. That's why we were so fortunate down there in Memphis to have that strong TV that so many of the guys were on every single week, and it was 90 minutes long, which was like a half hour longer than almost any other TV show on at the time, and yeah, that's so important. But listen, Bret, I'm looking down at the clock, and now I realize I've done to you what I swore I wouldn't do, and that what I told Glenn I hated to do is first put the pressure on somebody to be on the show, and then also keep them on too long. So I know you got other things to do, and I just want to thank you so much for coming on the show. And you've enlightened me about a lot of things that I didn't realize for all of these years, since 93 and 94, that I finally realized some of the things. And it was always such a pleasure to work with you, Bret, and I really appreciate it. And I appreciate, you really, working with you going into the WWE is what made my career up there. I mean, that set me off on the right track and on the right foot, and I really appreciate it.
Well, I say the same. You did a lot for me, and I always enjoyed working with you, and all the things I said today on the show are all true. I remember even right to the end, but maybe within a few weeks of the screw job, I remember you and me had wrestled maybe in Kentucky and different places, but we wrestled in cage matches for WWE. And I remember we had such great cage matches right at the very end, and then the screw job happened. But I remember right to the very end, all through my run as champion at different times, we always had great chemistry, and you were a stand-up heel and a great worker, and I loved working with you. And I have great memories when I watch back. In fact, that first SummerSlam with Doink the Clown and you is one of my favorite matches. It was a great night for me, and did a lot to enhance my career too. So I appreciate it. And thanks for having me on your show.
Oh, absolutely, and we'd love to have you back some other time. There's a million other things we could talk about. Other people that sprang out of some of the stuff that we did. One of the things that happened after the Kiss My Foot match was, and you stuck my foot in my mouth, and it was so disgusting that then we went off on a tangent where I brought in my dentist, Isaac Yankum, to go against you and try to get some revenge, and who, of course, later on turned out to be Kane. But, so many things sprung out of that series of matches with you and I.
And they're the good old days, Jerry. I loved every bit of it. And even with Glenn and Kane, and I remember when I worked with him at SummerSlam, he was super green. I gave him a good match, that a really complicated, hard match for a guy that that long in the business to try to follow and try to do. I think that was a breaking point for him. He did everything in the match, and we had a great match. And I've always been really proud of Glenn and the career he's had. And you've made a huge contribution to the business, and I appreciate all of that.
Well, Bret, thank you so much for being on the show. We're going to let you go here, and hopefully we'll get you on again sometime in the future.
All right, have some ribs with me, and call me anytime.